Well, it certainly has been a week.
Let's fucking go. The road is about to end. Let's fucking go.
Hey, poor! Hey, poor! Hey, poor! You don't have to be poor anymore! Jesus is here!
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Powered by Adrenochrome.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Qualitude, located not far from the Redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. I'm not sure where Professor Fuzznuts and Lord Nibbler are. They're around here somewhere. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cats. Get over it. And this will be a bit of a grab bag episode because I had to work yesterday, so a little bit of overtime. And then today I had to go to the monthly potluck for the local Democratic Party because I hadn't been to one for a while and I figured I needed to go. So I've not been able to do the kind of preps that I normally like to do. Patreon supporters, you did get some bonus content earlier last week, and I'll try to get some more out to you soon. It all just depends on how I feel and what's going on. No, still don't know what's going on with the landlord. I am a bit nervous, not so much about him, but work. So, let me explain this. Now, every company I've ever worked for, practically in Tennessee, has made the deal, has made the claim, oh, we give you, 2 days notice before we ask you to work mandatory overtime. That's the state law. One of the few laws that we have that, in regards to labor, that's actually decent. But when it comes to voluntary overtime, that's a different story. So, on Wednesday, they said, hey, we're going to, voluntary overtime for Saturday. I signed up because I'm still going to get the landlord paid off, and I don't know how much longer we're going to have the opportunity for overtime. Plus, we are sometime this month supposed to be doing inventory, and when that happens, I'm not sure how many days I'm going to work, and I'd rather not have to burn a vacation day if I don't need to. So, anyways, so sign up for it. Figure they'll let us know late, that day or something. No, they don't. Thursday rolls around and they say, well, we're only going to need 6 people for the overtime and we'll let you know tomorrow who we're going to pick. This, leaves me up in the air because I forget where I signed up, but I don't think I was in the first 6. So, it's like, well, if they go in order, then I'm probably out. If they go by seniority, then I've got it. Because basically, there's only 3 machine operators who've been there longer than I have. That's how big the turnover rate has gotten. But that's the McKinsey way. And they don't tell us until almost quitting time on Friday night. So I was one of the lucky ones who got to work. And they made this incomprehensible statement about the future of overtime that I couldn't understand and nobody else could understand. It was like, we're not going to have overtime, but if we do have overtime, it's going to be like this, but we're not going to have it, and we're not going to, if we do have it, we're not going to tell you in advance. So just, confusing. This kind of reminds me of back in 2008, right as the economy was starting to crater. The company I worked for was having all kinds of overtime, which was great. I was like, yeah, And then one day, I was coming into work, and at that job I also work second shift, see all these people who should still be there hauling their stuff out. And it's like, oh, they got laid off, man. I feel so bad for them. And I get my job assignment. I go in, clock in, get my job assignment. And one of the managers walks up to me and says, "Hey, Tucker, can I talk to you for a minute?" And I was like, oh, son of a bitch. Because I knew exactly what was happening. And sure enough, I got laid off. I mean, they did give me a nice severance package, but I still got laid off. And the reason we were working all that overtime was to fulfill contracts. And, because companies had contracted with us for X amount of parts. And once we got those parts shipped to them, we were done. And they knew there weren't going to be any more orders for a while, so they did that. So they banged them out as fast as they could so they could get rid of us. Not saying that's going to happen with this job, but I wouldn't be surprised if, they didn't start lopping heads. Again, I'm second shift, I'm senior, so my job is safe for a while. Most likely what'll happen is we'll come in one day and they will either cut all the temporaries loose right then and there, or we'll come in and it's like, where's all the temps? And it's like, oh, well, we had to let them go. At that point, I'm really going to be getting nervous. And I haven't mentioned this on the pod, but I'm going to go ahead and mention it now before I forget. I have basically just given up on the possibility of getting a car. Here's why I say that. Because let's look at this objectively. Probably cost me $2,500 to hire a lawyer to sort out all the fucked up paperwork to get my license back. Then I've got to get a car. A halfway decent used car is at least $2,500, if not more. Gas in my area is $4 a gallon, right? So that's a fortune right there just to drive the vehicle. And there's no way I can afford to get any kind of used electric car. And then I've got to get insurance. That's at a minimum around $100 a month. Because since it's been so long since I've had a license, I have to get the severe risk insurance, which is more expensive. You factor in maintenance because a car, a used car is going to have problems. Not necessarily serious ones, but, going to have to change, fluids periodically. might need to get new tires, might need belts, hoses, stuff like that. Some of it which I can do, some of it which I won't be able to do. And I have no idea where to take a car to get repaired if I can't do it. There's a shop just down the street, but that guy charges 3 arms and a leg for any repairs that he does. I know because I've taken his cars to him in the past. And with what I make, I just can't afford to swing that unless I get a roommate or two. Well, I haven't had the greatest luck with roommates, so that's kind of out of the question. Which means I'm just not getting a car. Financially, I cannot afford, I can't do it. There's no fucking way. Even if somebody gives me a car and I get the lawyer shit taken care of for free, I still can't afford the thing when you factor in the insurance and the gas and the maintenance. I can't do it on what I make, and I am not going to find a job in this town that pays more than what I'm making. So if I want to make more money, I have to go to drive to Nashville or somewhere, and then with gas being $4 a gallon, that's a lot less viable of an option. And if the economy craters, then, owning a car becomes more of a liability for me because I still got to pay that insurance. Still got to keep up maintenance on it. So it does not seem to be like a viable thing. So that's where I am with that. I am working on a few things so that I have better time going to work than what I presently do now, but I will get to those in a future episode. Well, let's discuss some of the news. I'm sure we're all glad that there was not a nuclear war this past week. I want to point out, however, that most of Congress didn't come back to Washington after the president posted on social media what sounded like to reasonable people was a threat to use nuclear weapons. And I don't care if you think the use of nuclear weapons was justified or not. That is absolutely the kind of thing that Congress should be in session for. Either to say, no, we're going to have to take this motherfucker out of power and impeach him because he's clearly not capable of running the country and his cabinet is unwilling to invoke the 25th Amendment, or this is a very serious thing that must be done, and we are here to explain to you why it must be done, why there are no alternatives, and we are brave enough, or firm enough, I should say, in our convictions that we are putting ourselves on record. the majority of politicians in both parties, I hate to both sides this, but that's simply the case, did not return to D.C. to do something about this. Now, there was an effort by some Democrats, and I cannot remember which ones it were, in the House to invoke the war, a ruling about the War Powers Act, and, or something along those lines, to at least get a statement out from members of Congress on the official government record that they felt what Trump was doing was wrong, and it got quashed by the Republican who was acting as Speaker of the House that day. Yes, it would have been a symbolic gesture. I will point out, however, that the reason the Republicans were able to do so well in past elections was because they made symbolic gestures. They knew they were not going to be able to repeal Obamacare, but because they held votes on it, they were able to shore up support in their base. Democrats do not seem to be willing to make those symbolic gestures, those same kind of symbolic gestures that would help shore up their support with the base. And I appear to have been bitten by a mosquito. First one of the season. Can you believe that, folks? My ear itches and there's a knot on it, so that's most likely a mosquito bite. Maybe I'll get malaria and die. Dying would suck, but at least I wouldn't have to deal with the coming economic crash. Right? And then Trump announced his fictitious ceasefire. And I say fictitious because Trump didn't agree to the terms that the Iranians wanted. He just said there's a ceasefire, and the Israelis kept on bombing people. And all of it reminded me of this when it came to the reaction of far too many people.
I want to say that the settlement of the Czechoslovakian problem, which has now been achieved, is, in my view, only the prelude to a larger settlement in which all Europe may find peace.
Yes, that was Neville Chamberlain coming back from Munich announcing peace in our time, which of course it was not. And I am vaguely, let's face it. Trump's word means as much as a certain Austrian paper-hanging son of a bitch's word meant when it comes to things like peace. Just today, Trump has said that the U.S. will be closing off the Strait of Hormuz since Iran won't open it up or whatever, and it's like, yeah, okay, buddy. That's not how any of this works. Friend of the pod, Bruce Carlson, on his My History Can Beat Up Your Politics, did a multi-part series some years back, which is unfortunately paywalled, about Neville Chamberlain, and he said, basically, we kind of have the wrong view of Chamberlain at this point in time, because we're all like, well, Chamberlain seemed to think that he could get a peace deal with Hitler. And Bruce points out that the British military, and the French military as well, were in no way, shape, or form able to take on the German military. And I don't recall if Bruce pointed this out or not, but anyways, after the war, key point, lots and lots of German generals said, oh, well, if anybody had actually opposed us, we would have folded and overthrown Hitler. There's no way to know that. But the European military forces were basically incapable of supporting a fight against Hitler until 1939. And so what Chamberlain did was buy time so that Britain could work out a deal with the States to get, for the Lend-Lease thing, so that the U.S. could supply the British with military equipment, and that would get the Brits, have a potential fighting chance against the Germans. And lest you think, because some people do, that when, Hitler started in the 30s moving around Europe and occupying places like the Sudetenland and whatever, that the U.S., if they had said, oh, no, we can't allow this, and gotten with the Brits and said, we'll stop it, we'll all declare war and stop it. The U.S. military was nowhere near the kind of shape that they needed to be to fight the war. In the mid-30s, all of our tanks and the majority of our aircraft, as far as the U.S. military was concerned, as well as naval vessels, the newest ones dated from World War I. It wasn't until we got closer to the 1940s, until, the late 30s, that the U.S. military had, equipment that was basically competent, or, somewhat contemporaneous, and even then it wasn't all that good. The Sherman battle tank, which was the main battle tank that the U.S. had, was inferior to the Germans' main battle tank. The advantage we had with the Sherman over whatever the Germans wanted, because the Germans had a Panzer, and then they had a whole shitload of other ones. But the main advantage that the Sherman had over the German main battle tank was that we could crank the Shermans out like nobody's business. And we simply threw more shit at the Germans, even though a good chunk of that shit for for at least the beginning portions of the war was inferior to the German equipment. In his memoirs, Patton, as he's marching up through Italy, talks about how he comes across a U.S. tank, which I think was a Sherman, because that's about all we had as far as tanks go, that, was sitting at a crossroads, and he's like, what the fuck are you guys doing? And yes, Patton absolutely would have said fuck. That would have been the mildest of words that he would have used, I'm sure. You guys are, a German tank, standard German tank shows up, they can put a hole right through you. And the guy said, yeah, they can. If you look there, there's one that's been blown up. There's another one that's been blown up. There's another one been blown up. We act like we're broken down and abandoned, and we wait till the Germans get close, and then we open fire on them, and, at close range, we can take them out. We just can't take but we have to have the first shot. At which point, Patton was like, God damn you, some manly men. Keep on doing it. But, I mean, to put it in perspective, the handful, and when I say handful, I mean small number, not necessarily like 3 or 4. The handful of tanks that the U.S. had before they started building the Shermans as we were gearing up for the Second World War in the late 30s, they were these weird-looking things that literally dated from World War I, and, it would have been easy as fuck for the Germans to take them out. One shot. It wouldn't have been anything significant. So there is some merit to the idea that, that Chamberlain knew he had to buy time so that Europe and the U.S. could re-up and rearm to go after Germany. One hopes that the Europeans have realized the same thing. Reportedly, Denmark moved forces into Greenland to delay the the possible takeover of the U.S. They were not going to fight American forces if we attempted to do a military takeover of Greenland. They were going to do things like blow up runways and other stuff that would make it difficult for us to get forces on the ground there in Greenland. And I can't blame them. And hopefully the European leaders are planning similar things. We know that the French and other European nations are the ones supplying Ukraine with intelligence, and Ukraine ain't telling us shit about what they're doing, which I do not blame Ukraine at all for, because it's pretty clear that it goes in Trump's ear and then it ends up in Putin's ear. So I do not blame the Ukrainians at all. I also know that there are people who are upset that the Ukrainians are supposedly giving information on how to fight against Iranian drones. I am going to have enough faith in the Ukrainians that they're ensuring the information they're giving U.S. military and Israeli forces is the kind of information that does not enable Iran to build better drones that can evade Ukrainian tactics. And I'm sure that information is different than what the Ukrainians are giving to the Europeans, because they can trust the Europeans more than they can trust us. Something else that may not seem significant but actually is, I do not have a link to the article, or I would drop it in the show notes, but the Finns have recently completed a rail line that connects them to Sweden and enables people to go from all parts of Europe by rail to Finland. apparently the European rail network isn't quite as interconnected as I thought. And from the way I understand it, there is now a direct rail route that you can take from Finland all the way to Spain, as well as the rest of Europe. This is important because that, that's environmentally friendly, allows people to easily travel around Europe for tourist purposes, and also allows people to, military equipment to be moved rapidly. I know lots of people think that, well, the Autobahn was designed by Germany in the 30s to enable the rapid movement of troops around the country. That's not the case. But you would not be at fault for believing that, because that is a thing that has been promulgated by numerous sources. I want to rewind back to just after the end of the First World War. Dwight D. Eisenhower, future president, he opted to undertake because he did not get to see a lot, if any, action. I forget how, what his World War I experiences were like. But after the war, he hatched a great idea, and I do not mean that sarcastically, to take a military convoy across the continental United States to see what it would be like. It was a nightmare, right? You can now drive across the U.S. in, a few days. It took them around a month. I don't remember if it was a little more or a little less, but it took them around a month. And shit broke down all the fucking time because of how terrible the roads were. I mean, they basically had the kind of equipment that a military force would have, in terms of maintenance vehicles and all the shit you would need if you were traveling, if you were driving vehicles leading a military invasion, minus the weapons vehicles. And Eisenhower's like, we got to come up with something better. And he then initially proposed what would later become known as the Eisenhower Interstate System after World War II, when Eisenhower was president. But what Germany used for the rapid movement of troops and equipment in Germany, as well as the rest of Europe, was the rail system. Because not only was it more efficient when you're dealing with moving tracked vehicles, you can't really drive them on the streets. They chew the pavement up. So even though the Eisenhower system is supposed to be enable us to move forces across the country in case of invasion rapidly, in reality, some things are just going to have to be moved by rail, or we're going to have to recognize that, once these forces go through, the streets are useless. Eisenhower and the Allies, as they were going into Germany during World War II, did use the Autobahn, but they rendered it impassable by ordinary vehicles because the tanks, etc., were chewing up the Autobahn. So, don't think that the highway system is going to save us, even though supposedly it is designed in such a way that, aircraft can use it to take off and land if airports have been blown up. That is only slightly true, and it all gets more complicated when you realize we are way short-staffed when it comes to air traffic controllers, be they civilian or military. So, by Finland connecting, they are building up their security in Europe in case, I don't know, Russia decides to invade them like they've done a bunch of times in the past, and NATO can't rely on the United States for some strange reason. Because Trump is Putin's puppet. But as a Yank who has heard endlessly about how great the European rail system is for passengers, which I do not dispute, it is infinitely better than ours, it is kind of surprising to me to discover that only recently has one country been connected to the rest of Europe. And while I'm sorry that it has taken the fact that we have a lunatic in the White House for this to happen, I am glad that it has happened, regardless of any military benefits that it might offer to Europeans. Speaking of the Europeans, by now you have probably heard that Viktor Orban lost his re-election bid. And you might go back to that episode I did where I talked about ways that fascism can be defeated without firing a shot. You are not wrong to do so. I will point out, however, that according to a lot of people, the guy who's replacing Orban is, it's sort of like replacing Trump with George W. Bush. He's better, but he still ain't that great. That doesn't mean that the Hungarians can't, push even farther to rid themselves of fascism. It just means don't automatically expect this guy to be dramatically better than Orban. Another thing I will point out, and I bet a whole lot of people are going to miss this, the only reason that guy was able to run was because, and forgive me for blanking on the guy who beat Orban, he was a member of the European Parliament, which granted him immunity, so Orban could not have him arrested. This means that it was due to the wider alliance that the Hungarians had, because they were members of the EU, the guy who is better than Orban was only able to run for office because by being a member of the European Parliament, he was protected. We don't have anything comparable to that in the US. So, I'm just throwing this idea out there. Perhaps we need to look at, assuming we get a rational president after Trump forming something comparable to the EU with Mexico, Canada, and parts of Central America, so that, we have a trade, because the EU started it out as a trade zone, and then they said, no, we need to do a little bit more than that. So perhaps we should look at doing something like that here, so we have a better chance of mounting a defense against fascism when it tries to rear its head again. And maybe we'll get our shit sorted out here in the States so that we don't have to worry about it. Canada, great country, but unless you take similar measures, you're going to be at risk. Mexico, same thing. This is not a slight against either Canada or Mexico. It is just me pointing out that one of the reasons the U.S. thought we could, the U.S. didn't worry about homegrown fascism was because we were arrogant enough to think it could never happen here. Save for Upton Sinclair. But it could, and it has, and we do not have hard-coded into our laws things that could prevent it, and I guarantee you, neither does Canada or Mexico, because they haven't been subjected to the same things that we have. They will be, however, in the near future, regardless of if we defeat fascism fully here in the U.S. or not, because that's just how it works. Now, I'm certain some of you have heard about a warehouse fire in Ontario, Canada, that was supposedly started by an employee who posted a video on Instagram showing the beginnings of the fire while he was saying all they had to do was pay us a living wage. And to that, I have to say,
Worked hard and you saved and earned, but all of it's gone to burn. And your mind, you turn your mind, you know you've really been so blind. Now's your time, burn your mind, you fall apart, you fall behind. Oh no, you're gonna burn. Fire to destroy all you've done.
and lest people think I am being a bit flippant about all this, I'm going to point out the following things in a very condensed version. I have spent a good 20 years of my life working in warehouses, nearly a decade of which was in a warehouse that was packed with paper products. Now, granted, these were not warehouses in a fire-prone area like California, but they were big warehouses. 500,000 square feet or more. For those of you in the civilized parts of the world, that's over 152,000 square meters, okay? These big places. They have impressive sprinkler systems as well as lots of exits for people to get the fuck out of the building. Apparently, when the fire started, there was only around 20 people working there. Trust me, there was no danger. Most warehouses that are up to code, there's not any danger of people being harmed in a fire. That's not to say all warehouses are up to code. I have been in a few that clearly weren't. But my point is, these places aren't inherent death traps the way they were when the Triangle Shirtwaist fire occurred a century ago in New York City. And the people who control these corporations, they do not understand the value of human life. They understand the value of property. So if you're going to get their attention, at some point, property is going to have to be destroyed. I am not advocating that people go out and destroy property. I am merely saying, like one would if they saw somebody, say, drinking expired milk. If you drink that, you're going to barf. I'm just saying that for things to improve, either the billionaire class is going to have to recognize that human life is just as important as property, at the very least, or a whole lot of property is going to have to be destroyed. That's all I'm saying, you know. I'm not advocating anybody go out and torch anything or smash anything or anything like that. I'm just saying the people in power do not recognize that human life has merit if the human lives in question are not members of the billionaire class. I will also tell you, and I will have a link in the show notes that demonstrates this, anybody who is advocating taking violent action, and as part of it they want to use black powder, they're a Fed. Black powder, which is the old-fashioned gunpowder that was used prior to the early days of World War I, is nowhere near as powerful as modern gunpowder. The video I will link to in the show notes is of a guy who is crazy, who he lives in Kentucky, not too terribly far north of where I do, from what I've been able to gather. He got seriously injured, and the closest hospital was for him to go to was Nashville. So he's not too terribly far north of me in Kentucky. But he took modern guns and, instead of using modern gunpowder, used black powder in the bullets and demonstrated what it was like firing them. And he did a fairly decent scientific method as far as doing that. And one of the some of the guns you could if you tried to fire a black powdered bullet, a bullet that the shell was filled with black powder rather than modern gunpowder, the bullet wouldn't even come out of the gun. That tells you how low powered black powder is. I mention this because there was a group who, at the beginning of the year, got busted. It was a big FBI sting operation because these were lefty terrorists, and they were gonna do stuff and lead a revolution. Yeah, and they were making black powder bombs, which almost certainly would not have done anything significant in terms of damage, right? Because they were making pipe bombs using PVC pipe and black powder. Now, PVC pipe can work for a pipe bomb. There's ways it can be really particularly vicious, but there was no mention of them doing the thing that you absolutely have to do to any kind of pipe bomb if you want the maximum damage. And a good number of pipe bomb, PVC pipe is strong enough that if it was filled with black powder and the black powder was detonated, it wouldn't have been much more than a really loud firecracker in terms of damage. Back when I was working for the foundry, I made casings for bombs. And the casings all had score marks on the inside. It was a crosshatch pattern all on the inside. This was so that when the bomb detonated, it would fragment into pieces, and you wouldn't have like 3/4 of the bomb fragments going off to the left and 1/4 going off in every other direction. You would have an equal distribution of damage. These people did not score the PVC pipe, from what I can tell, and that means, if they'd have managed to make working bombs, because this was an FBI sting operation, so they didn't actually make working bombs. They, the black powder that they had packed into them, if it had managed to burst the PVC pipe, it would not have been really effective in terms of damage. It probably would have just blown the ends off at the most, and that wouldn't have done a lot of damage. Whereas what you would want in such a situation is something that when it detonates, it damages things in 360 degrees. I will leave it to you to figure out what it would be a better explosive than black powder, or how you can get enough modern gunpowder to make such a bomb work. And I want to point out that there are any number of ways that you can take what is called direct action that hampers fascists and doesn't put any lives at risk and doesn't do things like burn down property. I'm not saying that people who do such things are automatically wrong. I'm just saying that there are ways you can deal with such. You can You can fight against fascism with direct action and not vandalize shit, even if other people do so. For example, one of the things that happens when people are going to, I don't know, let's say, cut down a forest to build a data center that nobody wants. One of the ways that the people building the data center will make money is they will sell the timber from the large trees on that property. If you put long metal nails in the big trees, say at roughly chest high, right? So let's say you have a tree that's 1.5 feet in diameter, or a foot in diameter or larger. That would actually be useful for timber. If you put metal nails in there and you put up a sign that says this forest has been spiked, well, they're not going to be able to make their money off selling the timber when they cut it down, because what those spikes do is they destroy the saw blades as the tree is going through the sawmill. So they're not going to want to pick that particular property. Doing it at chest height ensures that anybody who is cutting that tree down with a chainsaw is not hitting a spot where the spikes are, and thus being at risk of bodily injury. When the tree goes to the sawmill is when the higher sections, chest high or above, will be cut by the saw in the mill, and the operator of that saw will be in a booth where they are protected from any flying shrapnel that happens when that metal saw blade hits the nails. If you want to be really vicious about it, you make, instead of using steel nails, you make ceramic nails that are really, really hard, like a Rockwell hardness of 90, or is it the Ross scale? I forget. Anyways, if you talk to somebody who knows ceramics, they can tell you how to make really hard ceramics. You make nails out of that, then they're not detected by the metal detector, and the sawmill gets destroyed when those blades hit those ceramics. I'm not advocating you do that. I'm just giving this as an example of a way to harm fascism. Because, if they can't, when a construction project like building a data center or any large building in a wooded area is being planned, one of the ways they anticipate making money is selling valuable timber. If they can't sell the valuable timber, it becomes less economical for them to put the data center or whatever there. If the wood's spiked, they make less money, so they're more inclined to move somewhere else. Again, in some cases, all you have to do is put up a sign that says the trees have been spiked in this forest, and they'll be just like, no, we ain't gonna fuck with it. In other cases, they may not. But, if you spike the trees or not, that's up to you. It's generally not enough to harm the trees when you do it. So, you could, you're not killing the tree or significantly harming the tree when you do this. And the longer a forest is around, the more carbon it soaks up, the better it is for everybody. Okay, it is getting late. I need to get out of here, but I am going to leave you with some really hopeful things. Now, the first is with all the shit that's going on with the Strait of Hormuz, demand for electric vehicles is spiking everywhere in the world except for the US, and even in the US it's starting to go up. That's a good thing. If you can, I don't know, I have not checked, and I don't have time to look at it tonight. But when it comes to electric bicycles, anything under about $2,000, any electric bike you see is just an assemblage of parts. Those parts are all made by the same companies, and the bike is put together by one company that slaps any number of a different number of brand names on the bike. So figure out what, if you think an e-bike can, be useful to you, don't worry about the brand unless you're prepared to spend more than $2,000. Otherwise, worry about the features. If you're in a flat area, when I say flat, I mean like Ohio, Kansas, states like that, where there's not a lot of hills, you don't really need a powerful motor on the bike. 250 watts will do you fine. If 99% of your path, the path that you would take the bike on is going to be flat. If it is not going to be flat, then the minimum you want is 500 or 750 watts. A lot of times they'll say 500 with 750 watt peak, or they may say 750 watt with 1,000 peak. Those motors are all really the same. It's just the amount of battery voltage that's going to them, and the governorship. They have a governor, that the speed limiter that on them that you can defeat if you want to. So just don't worry so much about the brand. Just worry about the price and the features. We've got some fairly steep hills around where I am, and first bike was 250 watts. Second bike was 500 watts with 750 watt peak. The new bike is 3,000 watts. Each motor is 1,500 watts, and I have not fucked around with the governor. The 250 watt one could not get up some of the hills here, and even with the pedal assist, because I'm a fat old man, and putting the bike in the lowest gears, I just have to get off the thing and walk it up the hills because they were too steep for me. Maybe if I was in better shape, it wouldn't be an issue, but I'm not. The 750 watt bike, 500 watt bike, it slows down on those hills, but I don't have to pedal if I don't want to, and I don't have to get off the bike and walk it up those hills at all. The bike with the that's combined in power, the front and rear motors is 3,000 watts. I ain't got to do shit. And maintenance is dirt cheap on them because the parts are standard bike parts. in general, and the you can get aftermarket batteries that are just as good as the original factory battery if you need them. But if you take care of your battery, it'll last you for years. Now, because people have really powerful bikes, like my 3,000 watt bike, and they're assholes about it. Some states have passed laws as far as how bikes, how bikes are treated. Like my newest bike, not legal in a number of states. In other states, it's legal, but it requires motorcycle license. It really doesn't. It's more akin to a moped than a motorcycle for a variety of reasons. I mean, even if you pull the governor off, that thing is not gonna go anywhere as fast as a motorcycle. It will outperform a moped, but it's still not motorcycle performance levels. But if you're not an asshole, even in those states, from what I gather, you can skate on by, provided you don't really do something to attract the attention of the police. In most states, it is illegal to ride an e-bike on the sidewalk, so stay off the sidewalks. Right? If you've got a bike lane, take that. If like ungoverned, the new bike does just over 30 miles an hour. I don't ride it that fast in areas where the speed limit is under 30. I keep it, I try to follow the speed limit when the speed limit is lower than the max speed of the bike, and if the speed limit is higher than the max speed of the bike, then I just open that bitch wide open and go for it. Aftermarket batteries, again, you can, they're cheaper than the original batteries that come with the bikes, but depending on your bike, it may not be that dramatic a difference. They are nice to have because if you've got, on average, if you do, regardless of the size of the bike or the battery, they will do 20 miles on a charge if you're not pedaling. If you're letting the bike do all the work, it'll be about 20 miles, maybe 30. That's the rough ballpark. If you, depending on how much you're willing to pedal, you can get more than that out of it. But, what you can do is if you've got, say, a kind of, if you're like, well, I need to go 22 miles a day, you could buy 2 batteries. If, it's 22 miles to your job and 22 miles back, you could buy 2 batteries. And if you do like I do, in charge at work, you could take 2 batteries, you get to work, you charge the dead battery all the way up, and you ride home on the one battery that's partially charged. And when you get home, you swap, or as you're going, when that battery gets too low, you swap out to the one that's fully charged. Then when you get home, you charge the other one up, and you're golden. And if you're somebody who, I've been able to do this at some jobs, but not at this one. Like if you've got a locker or a desk where you can keep personal items, what I would recommend is buy 2 chargers, one to keep at home and one to keep at work. That way you can charge your battery up at work and you don't have to worry about keeping track of the charger, whether you brought it with you or not. I have I don't have that with the new bike. I have that with some of the older bikes. But this job, we don't have personal lockers, so I can't leave a charger at work. Because I would do that. That would make my life easier. But, that's something to think about. And again, most of the parts on the bike, except for the motor, well, the motors are generic. There's like two or three companies that make motors. Your bike is going to have one of those three, and you can get those fairly cheap. You could also get a conversion kit, so sometimes those it's cheaper to buy an e-bike than convert one. It all depends. But even if you can't use it for your daily commute to work, you can just use it to go to the grocery store. It's better than nothing. And that is one of the things that I discovered after I got the e-bike, is that this makes more sense for me to take to certain places than driving the fucking car, and it's faster than walking. Like, I'll give you an example from today. The place where the Democratic Party meets is, it's a block and a half away from the house. It doesn't really make sense for me to drive a car down there, and it's kind of a long walk sometimes, depending on conditions. But get on the e-bike, zip. I'm there in no time at all. Faster than a car sometimes. So it just depends. But they're worth considering. And again, like the brakes, the seat, and other stuff you may need for them. They're often just generic bike parts, so it's not like you gotta buy a specialized seat because it's an e-bike. You can buy any bike seat and put it on there if you don't like the original or stuff like that. Now, the final thing I want to mention is not merely that the crew of Artemis 2 has made it safely back to Earth, but that we are going to get a treasure trove of things that you cannot imagine from this mission in the coming days. Here is what I mean by this. The first DVD I ever bought was a documentary that was released in 1989 called For All Mankind. This is not to be confused with the Apple TV series. This was done by, I cannot remember the guy's name off the top of my head, but he was the co-writer for Apollo 13. Anyways, this guy got he went to NASA. He says, I want to do a documentary about the Apollo program. And NASA got the film that was used, not copies of the film, not videotapes of the film, but the actual film that was shot by the astronauts on the Apollo missions. That film is stored in liquid nitrogen. They had to, gradually bring it up to temperature, and this guy had to go through all this stuff, before he could shoot the use that film for the documentary. It was, like I said, the first DVD I bought, not Blu-ray, standard DVD. And it took forever for it to get here. But the thing I noticed when I put it on, and I got to watch it when I had an old-fashioned cathode ray tube. The first thing I noticed was the images I was seeing were clearer than any I had ever seen before of the Apollo program. And I am a goddamn space geek, so believe me, I have seen a lot of images from not only the Apollo program, but, going all the way back to the original Mercury to the shuttle era. And, I can remember looking at that and saying, there's no way we could fake this. I know just enough about how special effects work and what the capabilities are to know that we can never fake that. The crew of Artemis 2 not only had high resolution cameras, but they also had their iPhones with them and their other smartphones. And they used to take pictures. They could not transmit all those photos back to Earth because there's just not the bandwidth available to do that the way we have Earth to space communications set up. So now that the astronauts are back, they're going to be uploading all those photos that they took. Whether they were on the ultra high resolution Nikon D cameras, and if you know anything about cameras, Nikon and Nikon Ds are really great cameras. And, the astronauts, apparently, the ones that had iPhones had iPhone 17 Pro Maxes, which are just the most fantastic iPhones that they have out right now. And, I'm not slagging on Android phones at all. It's just, if you're going to get an iPhone and you want the best, it's the iPhone 17 Pro Max. They're going to have oodles and oodles of photographs that are in, massive formats, just massive amounts. And they're going to be now that they're back, they're going to be turning them over to the government, over to NASA. And those will be eventually uploaded to the web, and they are going to be stunning and spectacular. Sure, they didn't land on the moon, they didn't get their footy prints all over it, but I guarantee you, the shots that you've seen that are impressive, like the one where Christina, you have the image of Christina Koch looking out the window on the capsule, and you can see her face in the moon. As stunning as that is, there's going to be even more stunning images coming out of it. And that's going to inspire people to study science. And, regardless of if you think the moon is something we should be getting landing on and doing stuff with, surely you can recognize that inspiring people to study science in all its forms is what we need now more than ever. Okay. It's almost 4:30 in the morning, so I've got to get out of here. I will talk to you again soon, and as always, may science guide your path.
That's it for this episode of the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes. It's also on Stitcher, and most of the episodes are on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter at tparkatheist, and it's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist. You can email me at trailerparkatheist@gmail.com. Show notes can be found at tparkatheist.blogspot.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to donate to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show's notes page. You can also support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.